There's nothing we can do. Therefore, we are liberating you politically to do that which you need to do to preserve as much of your country as possible, because it's only going downhill from here. We know that's the case. The people in Washington, D.C. aren't stupid. They're criminal, but they're not stupid. They know Ukraine can't win. But because this is about domestic politics, they can't admit that. So we're going through a show, a Potemkin village of Ukrainian national defense. But that's all it is, just a show. All flash, no substance.
Yeah, you could almost say it's kind of like a virtue signaling, sending the patriots, here we're helping, as you say. But as you say, too, there's nothing left to send, pretty much. So what's the end game then? You can't really send anything that will help them. On the other hand, I can't imagine the people in the White House admitting defeat, that all this has been wrong. I can't imagine them saying, oh, okay, it's time to negotiate with Russia. I mean, the other day, I think Jake Sullivan said, it's not time for negotiations yet. So I don't see any readiness in the White House for negotiations. So you can't send Ukraine anything that will change things on the ground, yet you don't want negotiations. So, I mean, what's going to happen? Are they just going to let them bleed out and then just, kind of try to say, oh, well, we did what we could for them, and that's all we can do?
I mean, sadly, yes. That's basically this. Lindsey Graham made one of the few honest statements of any American politician when it comes to Ukraine a couple of weeks ago, where he said, we're going to fight to the last Ukrainian,
Yeah.
So, yes, the American solution is, we need Ukraine to put the totality of their DNA, the national treasure, their manhood, and we want them to be slaughtered on the battlefield for our political gain. And I always laugh when people like Jake Sullivan or Anthony Blinken or anybody else of that ilk, Lloyd Austin, it's not the right time for negotiation. Hey, gentlemen, you don't have a vote. You don't count. Your statements are you think Russia's actually listening to anything you say right now? Russia despises you. Russia hates you, reviles you. Why? Because you've shown yourselves to be people without honor, without integrity. The Russians, from my perspective, respect strength. They respect honor. They respect integrity. So you can be their enemy, and you can be an enemy involved in bloody combat, and they want to kill you. But if you are honorable, if you act with honor, if you act with integrity, they will respect you, so that at some point in time when you say, hey, we need to talk, they'll say, okay, we can talk with you because we respect you. You're a person of honor. You're a person of integrity. There is no one in the West today, no one, not a single person that the Russians view as being on that level. Angela Merkel used to be on that level. Putin used to take her phone call all the time. Angela Merkel has exposed herself to be a liar, a fabricator, somebody who used the Minsk agreements not to pursue peace, but to buy time for war. She betrayed Vladimir Putin. Macron is the same way today. Biden is nothing but a liar, and everybody in Biden's administration is a liar. So anybody who's waiting for the right time for negotiations, the only entity that gets to choose that time is the Russians. Even if the Ukrainians came crawling today, it'd be up to Russia to decide, do they want to listen to the Ukrainians or ignore the Ukrainians? Russia is the only vote that counts when it comes to a negotiated settlement. To believe otherwise, you have to believe that the U.S. and Ukraine are capable of doing something on the battlefield that changes the psychological dynamic of the Russian political, meaning convinces the Russians that there cannot be a military solution, that the Russians have no choice but to mitigate their losses by seeking a diplomatic solution. But we know that that's a mission impossible for Ukrainian army. General Zaluzhny has said so. Even if he magically produce 300 tanks, 500 armored fighting vehicles, and 500 artillery pieces, there's still no guarantee that he would be able to turn that into victory. But he doesn't have that. The Russians do more. And so Russia's the one that's dictating the outcome on the battlefield. And Russia will be the one that dictates terms of conflict resolution. So, Jake Sullivan and company, they're just deluding themselves into believing that they have any relevance. They have no relevance, nothing. They're not respected. How can the Russians ever deal with people they don't respect? People they know have lied about conflict termination, conflict resolution. The Russians need binding agreements, but the United States has withdrawn from the INF Treaty, from the ABM Treaty, and now uses arms control, including the last remaining treaty, New START, to pursue its unilateral advantage, not to pursue mutual disarmament, but to enhance the strength of the United States by using treaties to achieve their unilateral advantages by being deceptive and dishonest to the Russians. The Russians aren't stupid. They know this is going on. So they're not going to sit there and pretend to have negotiations with people they can't trust. They can't trust anybody. They claim, some of the statements I've heard senior Russians say about Zaluzhny, as they've called him a man of honor. They've called him a capable professional. So he's about the only one in the Ukrainian government. The Russians have created an atmosphere of potential. It doesn't mean they will negotiate with them. It's just that there's an atmosphere of potential. Zelensky, how could the Russians ever sit down with Zelensky? Zelensky, they've identified, they've labeled him as a Nazi regime, as the leader of a Nazi regime. You don't negotiate with Nazis, you kill Nazis.
Yeah, the Russians have this term, pretty much for the West, that non-agreement capable. Не договороспособный. That's about, I've heard that numerous times, and that's the thing. And will the West, let's say General Zaluzhny comes into power tomorrow. I don't see anyone in the West who will allow him to negotiate peace, because Ukraine doesn't exist without its Western sponsors. And, that's the whole thing. So do these people, okay, they're going to expand Ukraine. They're going to let every single Ukrainian soldiers get killed or maimed or whatever, or be captured. But what's next? Do you think there's a danger that they might try to open up another front somewhere else, like another flashpoint? For example, in Serbia now, in Kosovo, we've had rising tensions for the last couple of months. And of course, the West isn't doing anything to restrain the Kosovo Albanian side. So that looks like maybe someone's preparing a flashpoint, to kind of shift attention away from Ukraine. What do you think about that?
When I take a look at potential flashpoints, there's three come to mind, and I'll rate them in the order that I think that they are the potential. I think the greatest potential is in Transnistria, Moldova, for the Ukrainians and the Moldovans to do something precipitously by threatening the breakaway Russian region of Transnistria in an effort to shape the looming Russian offensive, to compel Russia to divert resources in a direction they might not otherwise have wanted to go, the Odessa direction. It's important for Ukraine to be able to fight the Odessa battle when there's an army capable of fighting, because I think the Ukrainians understand that the Russians are loath to destroy Odessa. And so right now is the best situation Ukraine would ever have for defending the southern rump area, the Black Sea access region. And so I'm fearful that they would seek to use the Transnistria region as a prompt, because frankly speaking, if I were a Ukrainian, that's what I'd do. It's exactly what I'd do. I'd create an emergency there that compels the Russians to divert their precious resources that they've spent all this time accumulating for a given task, which I believe is focused on completing the liberation of the Donbass and securing that area. And instead, they're going to have to divert resources to a fight in Odessa the Russians don't want to fight. So that's what I would do if I were the Ukrainian general staff. So that's why I think it's the biggest risk. The second biggest risk, I believe, is Poland and Western Ukraine. The Poles are going through a very difficult time. A lot of Poles are against this conflict, but a lot of Poles have somehow bought into this new Polish national identity. The Poles are taking steps to mobilize forces, pass legislation, etc., that could put them in a position to take advantage of a collapsing or collapsed Ukraine and move troops into Western Ukraine, thereby precipitating a direct conflict with Russia. It would be a non-NATO conflict because it would be fought on Ukrainian soil. Article 5 would not kick in, but Poland would receive considerable NATO support in terms of materiel, etc. And because it's literally one of these situations where the Poles would be fighting in Ukraine, but getting their logistic support in Poland, at some point in time, the Russians would feel an absolute need, if that conflict dragged on, to strike places in Poland. And now we get Article 5. This could become a very dangerous situation. The only good news is I think the Poles understand that that's just insanity. And hopefully reason will prevail, but you never know. The third place is Serbia and what's going on in Kosovo. But here's the thing about Serbia. One, I don't believe the Serbians are itching for a fight. And I'll say this because I think the memories of 1999 are fresh. And it's painful. And there's a lot of resentment in Serbia about what the West and what NATO did to Belgrade in 1999. But the question is, can Serbia prevent that from happening again? And is what's happening in Kosovo worth that risk of once again being targeted by, a NATO air force that Serbia can't stop? The other issue is that Russia's ill-positioned to help Serbia in a meaningful way. The amount of military aid that would be required is considerable. There is no land bridge. It would all have to come in via air, and that's a very vulnerable linkage. You don't want to be dependent upon an air bridge. And so Russia's support would be primarily diplomatic in nature, but that doesn't help Serbia when the bombs are dropping. The only plus for Serbia is that I think the Serbian, in 1999, there was no direct ground combat between Serbia and NATO. I do believe that if there was fighting in Kosovo, that the Serbian military is capable of defeating the K4 contingent. And the good news is that that's a deterrent for NATO to allow this to cycle out. There's an incentive now for NATO to prevent the conflict from breaking out, because the consequences for NATO would be the potential for a major defeat of its forces in Kosovo, and then the need to divert attention away from their primary objective, which is Ukraine, into Kosovo to restore this area and get bogged down in a major fight with Serbia, which in the long term NATO would win, but in the short term would be devastating for NATO, embarrassing for NATO, and would again free the Russians up to act in Ukraine. So I think the Serbian issue, the Kosovo issue, is one where both sides recognize there's nothing to gain by escalating this to conflict. The potential for conflict is real, but I do believe this is one where there might, this current tension might lead to a compromise solution. And I'm not here to dictate the terms of compromise. It's not my job. It's not my role. I'm sympathetic to the Serbian position, but I'm also a realist. I think, there's been some talk now, people put it on the table. I know your Serbian audience is going to get ready to throw knives at me. And you have every right to do so. But there might be a compromise where Kosovo gives up the north to Serbia and provides some autonomy for the different pockets of Serbs in exchange for recognition of their independence. There might be some compromise like that. I know Europe's been moving in that direction. I know the Serbs have rejected it, and the Kosovars have rejected it too. But to avoid a war, who knows what they're going to put on the table. I'm just saying that of the three scenarios, I think the Serbian one is one that has the greatest potential for a negotiated settlement, as opposed to Or now, what's going to happen is what always happens when somebody makes a bold prediction. Tomorrow, fighting's going to break out and the Serbs are going to attack. Who knows what's going to happen? There's going to be the exact opposite of what I said, and everybody will say that Scott Ritter's the worst analyst on the face of the earth. And that's probably true. But you asked me a question, and I gave you